President Kennedy was shot in downtown Dallas on the 22nd of November, 1963. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I know that happened at Parkland and with regard to the people at Parkland who were involved. I was not involved except peripherally and tangentially, and I know nothing about what led up to the shooting. So I can't help you with conspiracy theories. I'm aware of many of the conspiracies. The evidence, for example, that the rifle used was shipped from the New York Mafia source to Dallas. Sally, by the way, I don't know if you knew, she was a dancer. She was dancing in New York at that time in various clubs, Copacabana and so forth. While the Mafia may not own the clubs, or did not at that time, let us just say they had substantial influence. So anybody that worked in the clubs was around the Mafia, and she said that several of the mafiosi made kind of veiled comments about Mafia involvement in the shooting, but whether that was in fact truth or just somebody wanting to brag, no way to tell. On the Friday, this happened on a Friday, of course. On Friday, I was in a conference room at Parkland. At that time, there was a big cafeteria, and then across the hall was a small cafeteria called the Doctor's Dining Room, and every Friday there was a conference where a case that had died and had gone to autopsy would be presented. The medical staff, internal medicine department, would discuss it, and then I or someone else in the path department would present the autopsy findings. We were about halfway through that conference when a phone call came in with information that President Kennedy had been shot. Needless to say, the conference broke up. To get back to my office, you had to go down an elevator one floor and then across a series of halls. When you went down the elevator, you ended up right in the emergency room. So I was there in the emergency room when Kennedy was brought in, but was not, obviously, was not involved in his treatment. I got the heck through the emergency room as quickly as I could. Just as I was emerging from the door, I collided with a gurney pushing this wheeled thing. At the back end was a Secret Service guy, and he was running down the hall from the back entrance to Parkland, and sitting on the front of the gurney, I've never understood why, was a second Secret Service agent cradling a .45 caliber Thompson submachine gun, and both of them looked absolutely berserk, like they were just trying to find somebody to shoot. And needless to say, I decided my job was to go somewhere else, which I did as quickly as possible. With regard to President Kennedy, he was dead the moment the bullet struck. He had an extremely severe head injury. Without getting into gory details, let me just remind you, we spoke of the effect of a high-velocity bullet with its explosive character, such a bullet was fired from a military-type bolt-action rifle. Interestingly enough, although he was dead, I mean, they had a respirator hooked up and so forth, but he was dead from the instant the bullet struck. And anywhere along this course, you can find conspiracy theories. At that time, the 8th floor of Parkland was undeveloped. It was always kept locked, and they had stored stuff up there. It's subsequently been built and is now used, or used to be used, for a psychiatric ward. But at that time, it was empty. There's an 8th floor to this building. I don't know if you've ever been up there. It's unfinished. It's got some machinery in it, and that's it. Well, the first theory was that, well, President Kennedy wasn't really dead. He was injured. He was reduced to a vegetative state, but they didn't want to keep him around in that state, so they hid him on the 8th floor of Parkland, where he survived for a period of variable not so. He was dead from the moment. The first person then that comes into the picture is Dr. Earl Rose. He was the forensic pathologist. He dealt with the medical legal issues. At that time, as at present, the Saturday Night Knife and Gun Club was very active in Dallas, and Dr. Rose dealt with the results of their activities. He was an excellent forensic pathologist, really good, meticulous, knowledgeable about pathology in general and about things like gunshot and stab wounds in particular. He was sloppy as all get out. I always felt an autopsy should be done with meticulous care, not one drop of blood on the floor or anything else. And the deaners who would assist me when I did all, they do that. Boy, if one drop of blood hit the floor, they were after the towels to get it up. But Earl Rose, it looked like he did his autopsies with a hand grenade, but it was really good. Now, at this point, you have to understand, English common law designates a dead body as the property of the next of kin. If, say, your spouse dies, the body of your spouse is your property. You own that property. It is yours to do with as you wish, with 3 provisos. Number 1, you can't expose the populace to an infectious risk. In other words, if your body has, say, bubonic plague, we don't want to leave it around and get everybody else infected, or Ebola virus or something. In other words, the health of the neighborhood may take precedence over your property. Secondly, you have to treat the body with some sense of decency. You really can't just leave your spouse out on the front lawn to rot away. I mean, that kind of goes against the grain, so you can't do that. But otherwise, you can do with that body as you wish, and no one can argue with you. They cannot do an autopsy without your specific written permission, any more than they can take the engine out of your car that you own. The car is your property, the body is your property. There is, however, a third one, and that is if it is a forensic problem, then the legal system can order an autopsy to be done, whether you wish it or not. And there are two ways to do this in Texas. I'm not familiar with it, but I think most states have this. There's either a JP system, Justice of the Peace system, or a medical examiner system. In a Justice of the Peace system, when a body is, say, discovered, say with a bullet hole in it, the Justice of the Peace is called, and he decides whether to order an autopsy or not. This is not a good system. The JP had no medical training, no knowledge of forensic pathology. Doesn't even have to have a law degree. All he has to do is get elected. And if he goes around ordering autopsies on important members of the community, then their family are going to say, don't elect Brown anymore, he's really a bad guy. So you sometimes have strange results from a JP. But it was a Justice of the Peace system at that time. Subsequently, it has been changed, and Dallas is now in what's called the medical examiner system, whether it is appointed a medical examiner, a trained forensic pathologist, and he makes the decision. He may send out investigators, and if they find the body has a knife sticking in it, then the medical examiner will order an autopsy to be done, and that overrules the family's wishes. At the time that this event took place, there was no law about shooting a president. No federal law. Now, if it had happened on a federal land, then it would fall under the purview of the feds. When I was in the Army, I did an autopsy on an individual who was shot by his wife on an Army post. And then the federal, that's a federal land, it's a government land, then it came under the purview of the federal government. But at the time of Kennedy's assassination, there was no law against shooting a president. That has since been corrected. There is now such a law. But at that time, there was no such law. Which means that the dead body was that of a murder victim in the state of Texas, in Dallas County, and it fell to the Justice of the Peace to order the autopsy. And Earl Rose, quite correctly, said, the body stays here. Texas law has been broken, a murder has been committed. It's committed in Dallas County. A justice of the peace will order an autopsy, and that autopsy will be done in Parkland. That's what should have been done. It would have been better forensically, because Earl Rose was a really, really good pathologist. And second, that's what the law dictated. Earl was sitting at his desk, having announced this fact, when a Secret Service agent came in his office with a drawn .45 Colt pistol, racked the slide back to cock it, put it in his face, and said, "We're taking the president now." They did. It was against the law, but you don't argue under those circumstances. At that time, Earl Rose was horribly vilified. There was an author named Manchester who wrote a book about the assassination in which Dallas specifically was blamed. Dallas City, everyone who lived in Dallas City was a monster. And the worst of all the monsters was Earl Rose, because he wouldn't let the body go until he was forced to do so. He was just horrible. Not so. He was being very accurate and very correct. Interestingly enough, Manchester's book that in essence said Earl Rose was the worst of all possible people. Probably a year later, there was a department meeting, a dinner meeting, with Earl Rose in attendance at the department chairman, and a group of incoming freshman medical students arrived at the door on a scavenger hunt. And one of the things they had to get was a copy of Manchester's book, autographed by Earl Rose. He did it. He signed it. Somewhere in the world there is a copy of Manchester's book, autographed by Earl Rose. Anyway, the president's body was taken, and that ended that episode. Which brings us to Mr. Oswald. He was, as you recall, captured shortly after the shooting incidents. And Lee Harvey was shot by Jack Ruby. It was captured in a famous photograph. The deputies were bringing him for a trial hearing, and in the police department, it was in kind of a parking area of the police department, Jack Ruby, I'll talk about him in a moment, walked in with a stub barrel, a little short barrel pistol, revolver, stuck it in his belly and shot him. The shot went right through the liver, disrupted the liver terribly. He was rushed to Parkland Hospital. There was a guy there, superb surgeon, one I think say the best surgeon I've ever known, named Bob McClellan, who also specialized in liver surgery, who attempted to save his life. Suturing liver is very much like nailing jello to the wall. You just can't get there from here. Furthermore, the bullet went through the liver and injured the hepatic veins. You remember they come out of the liver high on the backside of the liver, and you just can't get there. You can't get around behind the liver, and you can't come through the back muscle, so they could not control the bleeding, and Lee Henry Oswald died. He was taken to the autopsy room. The autopsy was done there, and we tried to keep everybody out of the way. And this is the appearance of the autopsy room. This is the main hall of Parkland on the ground floor. This is the autopsy room. Had an entry here, the dressing room. This was the autopsy room. This was where the bodies were kept, cooler for the bodies. And another opening into the hall going out to the parking area. And we had policemen here and here. And we were quite certain that nobody got in to take any pictures. And the next issue of the National Enquirer had a picture of a gurney in our morgue with Lee Harvey Oswald's body on the gurney after the autopsy. And there wasn't any question at all that somebody had. Obviously, we don't know how it happened, but there was another room here which was the nurse's dressing room. I'd never been in the nurse's dressing room. I was a lecherous old man, but I didn't really want to do it. And it turned out that there was, in fact, a door right here, which was always locked, because we didn't, none of us, we were all boys at the time, me, all the residents were male, and, you know, we didn't even think of that door. In fact, we had stuff stacked against it, kind of. To the best of my knowledge, it must have been somebody came in through that door to take the picture, but it damned if it didn't show up on the National Enquirer. Interestingly enough, after the autopsy was finished, the body was to be removed through this door, going back for the hearse, and there was an army of photographers there. There must have been 20 photographers with big flashbulb cameras. This was before the day of the little camera. Down the hall comes a big, rotund-looking black man. He had come for the body. The photographers all looked, and he goes in this door with his gurney, and they cock their machines. The door opens. He comes out with the gurney with a body like this, draped in a blue cover. He must have been terrified. I wonder what happened to all those pictures. Anyway, the guy who shot him was Jack Ruby. And, can I go on?
Yeah.
I'll try to be as quick as possible. Jack Ruby was a kind of a ne'er-do-well who ran some bars and speakeasies in downtown Dallas. At that time, the elephant jokes were going around. Now, you're not young enough to know about elephant jokes, but they kind of came right around the time of the cruelty jokes. You remember those? You know, it always started, mommy, 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 what's a vampire? Shut up, kid, and eat your soup before it clots. And the elephant jokes were really stupid jokes. You know, how do you know if there's an elephant in your refrigerator? Well, you find his footprints in the pizza. So the story going around was, what did the police say when the elephant walked into the police department? The answer was nothing. They didn't notice him because of what happened when Jack Ruby walked in. Jack Ruby walked in, shot Oswald. It's captured on a front page picture for the newspapers all over the country. So how do you get him out? Well, you hire Melvin Belli. That name may not mean anything to you, but Melvin Belli is the guy that got us in the tort trouble we're in right now. He was the kind of guy who would do everything, not because it was right, but to get money for his client and, of course, for himself. Example, there was a case of a man working at a railroad switching yard. I don't know if you know anything about that. Those are dangerous places to work. And this guy got under a train and it cut off his lower extremity at mid-thigh. Melvin Belli came to the trial trying to get, $1 million for this guy, and he was carrying a package that was this shape. It was about this long. It was wrapped in brown paper. And he carried it very carefully to the attorney's table and very carefully laid it down on the attorney's table. The jurors all looked at it. Belli never so much as looked at it, never referred to it, made no comment about it, but every juror in the place could not help but watch that brown paper package. The guy collected millions, needless to say. That was Melvin Belli. So Melvin Belli's problem, how do I get Jack Ruby off a thing with it that's already been seen and is photographed for everybody in the country to see? His solution was, he says, Mr. Ruby has petit mal epilepsy. There are two kinds of epilepsy. Grand mal epilepsy, where you have an actual seizure, a convulsion. Grand being big mal, big bad. Petit mal, little bad, where you have just kind of a momentary, and that's about it. You know, as long as you kind of blank out for a moment or two. Well, Melvin Belli, one buddy said, well, not only can you blank out, but you can enter a fugue state. the hell is a fugue state? Well, you just don't know what you're doing because you're in this fugue state because of your epilepsy. And Jack Ruby was in a fugue state when he pulled out the pistol and shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Let me tell you, everybody in the country that had epilepsy was livid with rage. Because now everybody that knew that, John has epilepsy. What is he going to do? It didn't work. He was convicted, as he should have been. Before he could serve any time, he got dreadfully sick with a cancer. It was an adenocarcinoma. It was all the hell and gone over his body. He died in Parkland and was autopsied in Parkland. Of course, there's another conspiracy theory. It is that Jack Ruby was hired, probably by the mafia, to do the deed, and therefore they got him out of the country, that somehow they slipped him out of the country and his supposed death didn't occur, and he was even then living in South America, married to Hitler's sister. I actually looked up, Hitler did have a sister. She was born in 1896, her name was Paula, and she died in 1960. So it's unlikely that Ruby, by this time he was 64 or 5, could have been living with her since she died several years before. The question with regard to Ruby's death was, what was the source of his cancer? It was all over the place. And it's not uncommon. It's really difficult to say, did it start here and go there, or did it start here and go there? The question really came down, did it start at his lung and go to his pancreas, or is this a pancreatic adenocarcinoma that went to his lung? Earl Rose, who did the autopsy, showed me the slides, and I thought it was probably a bronchial carcinoma, and that's what it was called, on the basis of some histologic findings. So he apparently died of lung cancer. He was a non-smoker, but he spent his entire adult life in bars when everybody in the bar smoked. You could cut it with a knife, cut the smoke with a knife. And a very interesting feature is his autopsy number. Autopsies are numbered. Hospital autopsies are labeled as A, medical legal as M, and then the year. For example, the first autopsy, say the first medical legal autopsy in 2013 would be M13-1, and then the second would be M13-2, and so forth. Jack Ruby's autopsy number, as given by Earl Rose, was 007. And I never asked Earl whether he had to fudge the numbers to make it come out that way, or if that's really the way it just happened that it came up to a number 7. I've often wondered, because Earl had a great sense of humor. But anyway, Jack Ruby is 007 by his autopsy number. Y'all have a great vacation. We'll see you again.